I'm Josh. I'm a forward deployed angel investor at DatologyAI. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Yeah, I am. It's literally my title. Forward deployed. Pro tip: do not put on your LinkedIn that you are a forward deployed angel investor. You will get some of the worst startup pitches you have ever seen in your life. Ever. Just don't ever do it. Good advice. All right, let's do it. Let's start off with a round of introductions here. Here we go.
Hey everyone, I'm Ari Marcos. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Datology. Thank you everybody for coming to this event and looking forward to a fun conversation.
Hi, I'm Lucas Atkins. I'm the CTO at Arcee AI, and similarly, thank you for coming. Looking forward to chatting.
Hey guys, I'm Johannes, co-founder and CEO from Intellect.
Very cool. Guys, thank you so much for coming. Thanks so much for talking tonight. First question, couple of questions from me, and then we'll open it up for the audience, see what the audience wants to know. First question for me, this is the second annual San Francisco Tech Week. I know, amazing, right? Two tech weeks in a row. It was so successful last year, they decided to do a whole new second one. What has changed recently in the space of pre-trading and space of foundation models over the last year? What has been like, what for you has been like the biggest shift we have seen in the past year? Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot that has happened in the last year. Certainly if there's one constant in AI, it's that things change very rapidly. And in 6 months, the zeitgeist will be different than it is today. That said, I think there are a couple really kind of huge themes that have emerged over the last year. And I'll just speak to one or two of them. But I think one thing that was clearly a big difference, right, was the rise of test time compute and reasoning models and thinking about that. RL is another big one. But the one I want to focus on that I think is interesting is really with DeepSeek and now with many other models. I think that there's been this kind of psyop that trading your own model or customizing your model needs to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. That has largely been kind of now debunked. DeepSeek was $5 million in marginal compute costs, the GTLSS model for $4 million and $500,000 for the large and small models respectively. We've gotten very good and starting to make training quite efficient. And there's still a lot more to do here. We're just getting started kind of as a community here. But I think that's a really interesting difference that has really changed. I think a year ago, the idea was kind of that, hey, closed source models cost hundreds of millions of dollars to train. I mean, we can found that, like Claude 3 as an example was only cost a couple $10 million to train. So we're seeing a lot of these trends showing that, you can build models for a lot cheaper than what it was. And I think these costs are just going to continue to go down. My expectation is that another year or two, we'll see that you can train really, really powerful models for under $1 million. And I think that's very different than kind of the way the world was thinking. Even just here, right?
I'll second that. I remember when Llama 3 came out, I was talking to a CEO of another startup, and we were talking about how much those models must have cost the trades. And the 70B model came up, which again, 70B is those large. It's not a cheap model by any means, but they were like, oh man, that thing must have been like $400 or $500 million. And I was like, okay, yeah, all right. And it's not. It doesn't have to be, and that is, I think, it definitely in favor of the people that want you to be using their certain system, is that it can be done for any amount of I wouldn't say marginal money, like $1 million in length. That's still not chump change, but it can be done from scratch much more inexpensively than we were kind of led to believe. On the note of what's different between a year ago and now, the biggest one by far is that the RL, I think, paradigm that we're seeing, or the return to RL, I guess, if you will, and the kind of advent to be able to do online learning in these systems in a way like you were using a form of reinforcement learning with RLHF for a very long time. It wasn't what was widely considered to be. It was on the same RL that was used in AlphaGo and AlphaFold and all of those. But now we're seeing that you can hyper specialize a model to something that before was near impossible with just like standard Postgre. You can pick a task that is not super data efficient. There's not a lot of data around it, and you can, if you spend the time piping together and building the right system of environments of feedback mechanisms, you can get this thing quite good. It also, I think people said that 2025 is going to be the year of pages. And it almost became a meme at a certain point. The first agent I ever used where I was like, oh, this is exactly what they said it was going to be, and it's very, very good, was deep research. And that was only built by doing online RL towards this very somewhat not verifiable task. And I think that over the next 2 years, there's not a lot of things I would say very confidently about the AI industry. I think, as you said, the biggest constant is that there will be change. I think that the meaningful AI apps and experiences that we'll see in 2 years, whether from big labs, startups, what have you, are going to be people who are doing reinforcement learning and post-training towards their very specific product in an online. I think those are what are going to build like truly meaningful experiences that can adapt to this very nuanced and fuzzy objective that is interacting with humans. There is nothing but interacting with humans that is binary or verifiable at any rate. So, yeah, I think that's a big exchange.
Johannes, both those answers are obviously wrong. So please tell us the right answer.
Damn it. But honestly, agree with both as men like the two themes in a sense, right? On like what changed most is obviously the Albert and like, because I was already talking about, and I think the second theme of like pre-training getting a lot more like affordable in a sense. And I think the interesting question there is, why did it get more affordable, right? And I think there are a couple of different reasons, right? Like obviously data, getting a lot better, maybe better training algorithms and stuff like this. But I think also one of the main components is we've been training way more sparse mixture of expert models, right? Like we are pushing the action sparsity way higher right now than we did a year ago, right? Like a QMI model is 32 billion parameter active, trillion total parameter, right? And what's the smaller models like the latest Quints. I think that changes a lot of different things, right? From like how do you actually like deploy those models? You need really large inference systems on like a lot of nodes of H100s or H200s, B200s, and so on, and serve them with very tight batch sizes, right? To actually utilize all this compute for those models. So I think that's one of the things that majorly changes over the last year.
One more thing I just wanted to add quickly. I think another big difference is the way that the community is viewing synthetic data a year ago relative to today. I think a year ago, the main thought around synthetic data was, hey, it leads to model collapse. And you're going to end up with a really bad model if you train on synthetic data. There's kind of no way to exceed the performance of the teacher model that generates synthetic data. Synthetic data is really just distillation in disguise. I think that was kind of the commonly held view a year ago. And now we moved into a world where basically all of the very strong Chinese models have cited synthetic data as a major portion of what's led to their strength. It was highlighted in the GPT-5 release and as one of the main kind of innovations there. So I think that's another place where like a year ago, I think there was like really tense skepticism and pushback against this. And now this has kind of become just, oh, it's accepted part of what you need to do to build a great model. And that's a pretty rapid change that's interesting.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Sorry. Okay. Sometimes my delivery's a little too dry. I'm sorry about that. Okay. That was the past year. Because I was telling you, Jeb, only for you, Lucas. Only for you. You're welcome. Let's say that I have done a bunch of bad stuff in my life, and I get reincarnated tomorrow, and I am the head of AI at a large U.S. bank. Right? It's like JP Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo or something like that. And I have a directive from my CEO. I need to deploy a state-of-the-art, model, pre-trained from scratch in 60 days. And I have $1 million, $5 million, $10 million. I have unlimited money to do it. What is going to stop me from getting this done? And Lucas, I want to start with you.
The fact that you're a day old.
Older, born yesterday. Okay. But then once we've on day 2, what's the day that stops me? What happens then?
I could decide about what it is. Yeah. The thing. I think that there's a few. I mean, beyond just
there's a few, but what's first? What's the first
talent? I think
the talent. Yeah.
And I get that, and I don't mean that in a way of that what we're doing or anyone's doing is particularly not learnable. And I am a particularly rather self-taught individual in this space. A lot of my team is self-taught, right? Lots of, and I think that that's one of the the beautiful things about this ecosystem is that as we build these tools and they get better and better and better, the more people are able to jump in and get more of a nuanced understanding of it. Being able to ask questions something without a situation where they normally would have felt nervous about asking that question. But as a lot of these enterprises have a lot of trouble with getting people who have normally been very development focused into the rather. There is nothing that is concrete about training where you from. It is very. Every decision that seems obvious has a situation in which it's the wrong decision. There is always you might do it, but in this case, but you're going to do it in that case. And so having people who are able to kind of cut through the noise and help you make the right decisions, especially when it comes to data, is a big one. And then also figuring out exactly what you're trying to optimize for and what you need that model to do. It's a very tricky world, especially as an enterprise where, figuring out exactly what a good use of AI is also like very tricky.
So, be honest, what do you think? What stops me? I think there are a couple of different things that I think the companies here are pretty much like working on in a sense, right? So on the one side, like actually getting good data, synthetic data for your specific use case and so on, right? If you actually want to fine tune a model, I think huge bottlenecks still on like really good infrastructure, orchestration, stuff like this to do your workloads. If you actually want to like break into the new paradigm of actually doing end-to-end reinforcement learning in your specific like application, scaffold environment and so on, right? I think there are a lot of infra pieces not figured out yet for like people to actually do it right now, right? So those might be the like biggest bottlenecks where like I think all the companies here are working on to solve.
I think there are two major barriers to entry and kind of one thing you have to do first. The first thing you have to do is define what success for a model looks like, and that's often through a set of emails. Right, we have to know what success means for you, having a model that's good at what exactly. Once you have that, you can first now start evaluating those source models, open source models, see where their gaps are. Generally, what most enterprises find is that there's quite a bit of gap, especially on the enterprise-specific use cases. The reliability, the accuracy, this isn't there. So then you start thinking about, okay, I want to customize a model by doing continued pre-training or mid-training on an open source model or potentially training from scratch, depending on your goals. And then there are two big barriers, right? There's first a training barrier, and then there's a data barrier. The training barrier, I think like 4 or 5 years ago was really, really high. But Mosaic, I think, was the first company to recognize this gap. I get a lot of former Mosaic folks and current Mosaic folks here that recognize that that's a real opportunity and you can really make that easier. And now I think that's been, not fully, but it's starting to get commoditized by the hyperscalers, and figuring out ways that you can now even do this, with decentralized compute, but the primes do it, which I think is really awesome. And so that barrier I think has been mostly eroded, but still is not easy. But then there's still the data barrier. How do you actually use your custom proprietary data? How do you integrate that into a model effectively? How do you use that? How do you generate synthetic data against it? And that barrier still exists. I think it's still pretty high. And in many ways, kind of our whole goal as a company, as Datology, is how do we reduce that barrier? How do we make this so that everybody can do this? Is this easy? Because frankly, I don't think it's good for the world if only 4 companies know how to do this. I think this is a really transformational technology, and anything that we can do to make it more accessible to everyone across the world is a good thing. So I think those barriers still exist, but I hope that they will be a lot lower in the coming years.
All right, very cool. Thank you. So awesome to have all of you at this meeting of the Mutual Liberation Society to Datology, Arcee, and Prime Intellect. Thank you. All right. Looking ahead, a year from today, God willing, we will be at the 3rd San Francisco Tech Week. So we're pretty excited. Where are we going to be at? I'm super curious. Where do you all see things going over the next year? And I can ask this generally, but I'm especially curious about open source versus closed source models, basically, and how people should be thinking about building on open source models versus using closed source APIs or whatever. Curious where you see this going over the next year, and curious really about after you answer, if you would tell me what would have to change for you to change your answer in the next year, I would love to know. And Johannes, I'm going to start with you on this one, okay?
Yeah, great question. And first of all, I really don't care about the third aseptic reach.
You know, the controversial.
Not that controversial way.
Any Andreessen Horowitz people here, he didn't mean that. He's just kidding.
What was the question?
Open or closed? Open or closed. What happens over the next year?
Yes.
Open and closed models. What are you building on and why? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I think like what we've seen over the last year, right? And like, I think it's, reasonable to assume that it kind of continues in the same kind of direction, right? That we have a lot of like great open source models. Like I would say like 2 years ago with like the first Llama series and so on, maybe that wasn't really like the case yet, right? Like open source was very much behind like GP4. But with the latest models, I would like people are maybe disagreeing, right? But I would say we are definitely closer to actually the frontier right now than we've been like 2 years ago. My guess would be that kind of continues over the next year. You're gonna have more open source progress, more from QS labs as well, right? With a lot of like new labs actually popping up that are aligned with like open source values and actually putting something out there that have the incentives correctly set for actually outsourcing something, right? So like companies that actually build up on this technology can customize it for their specific workloads, and they can like create revenues through all of those different streams, right? That's how I see the next year forward.
What about you, bud?
So I certainly agree with Johannes. I think one of the things that has I think violated a lot of people's predictions over the last year or two is the kind of gap between the best closed source models and the best open source models has certainly gotten much smaller. I think in particular, the rise of the Chinese open source models probably was very surprising to many folks. And I think the quality in those models and the number of models that are that good, not to mention just like the ridiculous shipping velocity of the Quenti. Certainly, I think it's changed the landscape a bit. I think also, like, even looking at closed source model providers, a big difference. Like, a year ago, I think most people would laugh at Google and Gemini, and now Gemini is, like, trouncing everything. And personally, I would kind of expect that's going to continue on the closed source side. I think one big difference is that we're seeing the closed source models move more to being systems rather than models, whereas the open source models are still models, right? So, like, when you actually go and interact with Gemini or with ChatGPT or with Claude, you're not actually interacting with just a model, right? You're interacting with the whole system that's going to route it to different places and call specific tools of memory and all these various things. So I think, that's probably one place where we'll continue to see some differentiation, that there. But I would expect that the kind of core model capability gap will continue to get smaller and smaller. And I think one thing that I would bet is that we're going to see really small, sparse models hit really crazy performance numbers. I would expect that we start to see sub 1B total. Sub 1B applet, not total models start to hit numbers that required 70 models to do even 2 years ago. I would expect that's going to happen and will change a lot of things, right? Because that enables so much more with respect to deployment. One last thing I would just say is that we're in this weird dichotomy where the consumer impact of AI has just been absolutely massive, right? ChatGPT is at 800 million weeklies. And I imagine most people here who are very deep in the community, your parents probably are using ChatGPT. Some of them might call it chat, which personally I find kind of weird. But that's happened. But in the enterprise, basically all you still see is enterprise document search being used. That's kind of all that's happened yet. So I don't know if it's going to happen in the next year, but I hope that starts to change.
I think that's last 2 years or 4. I think, from my experience working with enterprises, I have for the most part, when you're looking at Fortune 500, even Fortune 2000, definitely Fortune 100, they are about 2 years behind the quote-unquote frontier. I think a lot of that is just scale, bureaucracy, an aversion to risk that those at startups don't otherwise have, right? Startups are inherently, more have a higher appetite for risk than Ford. I don't know why I called Ford out, but
They called JP Morgan's.
yeah, I think that the biggest change will also just be, I think you're going to see a lot more people training their own models. And if not from scratch, making their own customized versions of other open models. I think that is kind of, going back to my previous answer, like I think that is how you get the biggest benefit is having your own weights in your own environment, or at least trainable by you towards your system, is like a level of customization and capability that you otherwise could not get from a closed provider. So I think that will continue. I think you're going to see the West really open up as far as open source models. Like, I think that is going to really accelerate. For a very long time, it was hard for companies to justify real sourcing models. If you just raise the big round, the last thing you want to do is clear your VC. You're releasing your product free. But it is like a really unbelievable way to get your name out there in a world that otherwise, in a world of just closed APIs, it wouldn't happen. So I think that's going to happen. And then I really do think that we are, to Ari's point, like you're into some very powerful small models. They will still lag behind what their large counterparts can do. As small models get better, so do big ones. They benefit from very similar efficiency gains and improvements, but you are going to see some small models that even 2 years ago you would not believe were at that side.
Awesome. I love it. I think we have a special. We get to see something.
Oh, yeah.
Do we? Would you mind?
Powerful small models.
Speaking of powerful small models,
We set this up.
nice lead in. Yeah, go ahead.
This was being weird.
So to this app, as many of you may know, the three of us have been working together on building some cool small models, and had a little preview of some of the early results from models that are in training still to talk about. So I'll let Lucas tell me about the model for Arcee training.
Yeah, we've been working with Datology now since basically March, really, right? We released our first from scratch model at the end of July. And since before that model came out, we were also working with Prime Intellect on how can we very, 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 very quickly catch up architecturally from an infrastructure perspectives to the other open away counterparts. And it's been a really lovely collaboration between all three. I think we all play very nicely into a very specific niche within the model training world, and it's been really lovely. So yeah, we have early results for our next series of models. They're called Trinity. There's gonna be 3 of them. They're halfway through training. We're gonna announce 2 of them. So we have a Nano, which is 6B, 1B active. We're gonna have Mini, which is 26B, 3B active, and then Trinity full size, which is undisclosed as of right now. And we have some early results. I must preface this with, this is literally halfway through training. We haven't done any decay, anything. This is 50% checkpoint. You can go ahead and show it. That is, on the far left is Nano, so 6B, 1B active on GBQ8 Diamond, 35.8. AFM 4.5B, our first model, which is 28. You have Liquids model from yesterday, they're AB, 1B active. And then you have Granite's model from last week at 31. We are extremely excited about where this is going to go, and they'll be out soon. So, yeah.
Still another 5 or 6 trillion tokens and all the best data to go.
Yeah, we didn't even get to like the good data. Although all datology data is good. The better data.
It's awesome. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. What a time to be alive. It's amazing. We would like to open it up for audience Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, and I should say this very clearly, questions, not statements, for all the panelists, I would be happy to hear them. I think, do we have any audience mics? We didn't have that kind of foresight, did we? No? That's like, yeah. Yeah? Oh, good. We have, fantastic. Thank you, Pratyush. Yes, please.
Thank you for hosting this panel, but this up, but you gotta flick it out. Oh, there you go. Hello. So something that was occurring to me, or I guess has been occurring for me over the past 2 years, has been you guys have pranced around it for a little bit, is sort of the public perception of it, because there's of course a lot of within this space there's a lot of excitement, right, of sort of building these models, make the systems around it and making it really good. But there's been growing resentment outside of the bubble that all these models are energy destroying or like energy consuming, water consuming, plagiarizing, cheating machines. And whether or not we can discuss the merits of that all day, it'd be pointless ultimately. But my question is, do you think these criticisms matter? Because you just said 800 million people, weekly users of ChatGPT, for example. So ultimately, something clearly it's working. Like clearly the system, people like it. But do you think that this is something that should be addressed? And what does that even look like? Like Claude, they've always said, anti-slop, the whole Claude Cafe or whatever in New York. So like clearly they're thinking about it. Like it's not in their mind. But the question becomes, they see these models as Skynet. And like it was and even if they're not if they're on the skeptical side of it, where they see it as, it's not AGI, it'll never be AGI, whatever, that they're still consuming a ton of resources. So my question is, does it matter? Does the public, the broader public, matter their opinion on these sorts of things? And how would you go about addressing it if it does? Like, how would you go about creating a solution?
I won't pretend to have an answer as to the solution. I think that if there were a solution that had a really well-defined series of steps to go about accomplishing that I could name here in the next few minutes, it wouldn't be done. But I will speak to you, the first part of your question, which was, does it matter? The answer is absolutely. I think it'd be silly to say that it does. I think that the benefits of this technology that, everyone here is probably pretty enthusiastic about, pretty astounding, and there's a potential for good quite large. Yeah, is the potential for bad quite big? Yeah. I think that I had an interesting conversation. My sister works for an environmental lobbying firm in Texas, which is a state that is notoriously, they don't care. And she works in Austin, and she does a lot of their drafting of bills, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of stuff about water use, which there's a ton of misinformation around. I think that's probably the first thing I would do, is try to combat the misinformation that's out there, just around how these systems are built and how much water is actually, recycled versus used. There's a whole bunch there. But she brought up to me, her team was starting to try to utilize that a lot, because these models are getting good enough, and you're getting a lot of tangible value from a automation standpoint, and overcoming boilerplate tasks. She warned me beforehand, because she asked me to speak to them about some things they could do. And she said, we have someone who works on educational law. They draft policy for lawmakers around education. And they had a donor recently suggest that AI should be used to tutor kids in high school, and then that information should be given to employers in the future. And she was warning me that person's probably going to have a very pointed question for you all. And the first thing I did when I got on that call is I said, hey guys, my name is Lucas. I'm the CTO of Arcee. Here's what we do. We build, small language models such that everyone can run their own model without worrying about their data going somewhere they're afraid for. I pulled up our recent AFM 4.5b, I loaded it up on my Mac, and I started asking questions as if I was being tutored by a model. We are building a way to get around the data and the privacy. There are so many solutions to not sending your data somewhere you don't want it to go. When you get into the question of plagiarism, a lot of work is being done by Datology around synthetic data. Now, that's not a complete solve for that, but there is a tremendous amount of work being done on how can we build these systems better while using outputs from the models themselves. And there's a lot of ways in which, going forward, we are going to be able to build these systems in a compliant way, especially as these big labs start trying to get into regulated industries. They are going to start building very, very compliant machines, because there's a lot of money there. So that's kind of how I view where we're at now. I think we're an order of magnitude better than we were 2 years ago as far as the abundance of open models and the solutions you have with them. I think that if I'm actually going to do what I said I wasn't going to do, speak to how you solve it, it would be continuing down that. It would be championing open source models. It would be giving people the tools to build and run these systems the way they want, and having an open dialogue around that kind of misinformation aspect that is a non-starter for all of you. So that's what I think.
Success, both career. Produce, thank you so much for this.
First thing is thank you for this informative and very powerful conversation that we're having. I'm concerned about the viability of the open source models. I mean, it takes a lot of money, and as we can tell by the burn rate of the closed source models, that they're burning hundreds of millions, billions of dollars fantastically. How do the open source models actually turn a sustainable product?
I think the first question is, are the closed source models sustainable? Maybe, but there's that. Well, I think we're clearly in an era where none of them have, but most of them have negative gross margins and are being subsidized by VCs, right? Just like the early days of Uber, where you could get across the city for $3. That's no longer the case. And I think if we do have all the closed source models really win, I think what you should expect is that prices will go up by a lot. When they do really kind of dominate the market. That just tends to be what happens in such markets. That said, I think that while, certainly the closed source labs are spending a ton of money, we're also seeing more and more players build models that are in competition with the closed source labs, despite having pretty limited resources. Look, China doesn't have H100s for the most part. They're using H20s and other various things and are able to produce not just one, not just two, not just three, but 6 models that are all really, really strong. I think that, starts to lead towards this viability argument. And you look at things like DeepSeek, right? It was $5 million in marginal compute. It doesn't have to cost this much. Now, in order to do that, you have to get everything right the first try. Right, that $5 million in marginal compute, that doesn't include the salaries of everybody who had to figure this out. That doesn't include the R&D. That doesn't include the 20 failed runs before that, many more than 20, all the small iterations, etc. But I think that's why it's important that companies like the three of ours exist, because if everyone has to start from scratch, then no one will ever be able to compete. But if instead you can rely on specialists that know how to do each part of this really well, and can make it so that you get it right the first time you try, now all of a sudden the cost for a new player to break into this becomes very, very achievable. And we're going to continue to, the cost of these models has gone down over the last years, or the last several years. It's going to continue to do so. We're going to continue to be able to get them. I think the other thing is that capabilities can't really could infinitely increase. For most capabilities, there's going to be an S-curve, right? And I would guess that for a lot of use cases, models are kind of already good enough to cover them. If let's say that somehow there's a global ban on accruing models beyond a certain point, as some people would like to have happen. If that happened, I think we still have 10, 15 years of just taking what we already know how to do and then percolating it throughout the economy, because enterprises are slow. So I'm not nearly so pessimistic. I think that there's a strong incentive from the big players to talk about how expensive it is, because they, of course, don't want people to compete, and they want to raise more money. So I think we should just be dearly skeptical of the claims that's
Any more questions? Hey, Swix's roommate.
That's one way. So I have a question about how you would determine model sizes. So you showed the Trinity, there's a 6B, 1B active, right? We see a lot of 20B, 5B. It's upper end of MacBook, 5090. But in small models, you have small Quens, Gemmas, Llamas. They kind of all suck. 6B, 1B, it's that weird stage, right? It's too big for a phone. can it tool use? Like, I don't know if you guys could just share, because there's not that many other than the big labs that just do small that are useless and they don't say why. But yeah, you know.
By the first off, that thing will fit on a phone for sure. Like that thing will be, you take a 4 GB 5 gigs of VRAM, which a lot of phones are heavy with split. But there's no real metric. It's a lot of vibes. If I'm being very honest, I do think that you get into a range where you decide, okay, what do we want it to be able to run off, and how good do we want it to be, and how much money do we want to spend? And once you kind of answered those questions, that will put you into a general area. So we knew that for this one, we were training Trinity. There's the main series one is much larger, and we knew that we needed a kind of a run to prove out the infra, so that we didn't make a huge with stats. And we knew that if we kind of took what size that was going to be and then scaled it down a little bit and then kind of looked at the same shape, it would be just in that 20 BE-ish area. GBT OSS had come out, so we were also between Qwen, Freeze, 30B 3D active. GBT OSS was like 20.5B 3B active. And then you kind of just look at your architecture. And once you've decided, okay, we wanted to have this many layers, and we wanted to, then you kind of get into a world where you're kind of just, you're fudging around within there, and then you eventually kind of get a shape with graph. So I wish it was like, we did 200 experiments, and this was the perfect, no, a lot of us would say, yeah. And then the 6B came about because someone at Prime Intellect had a release. This interesting idea. And we kind of went, screw it. Like, we need to justify the name Trinity. So I was like, I need to train the 3 of them, And then that model said, I'm so stoked.
I'll give a slightly cynical answer and then maybe a longer term answer. The cynical answer is where is there a gap in the market where you can get a really great performance, but there isn't a model that's there already, from just perspective of making a spy, which unfortunately is something that I have to think a lot about. But I'll give a bit of a longer term answer, which is, that when we talk to customers who are considering customizing your own model, the first thing that they care about is getting the accuracy to a point where the model's good enough for the use cases they need it to do. Because most of the time, the number one problem when you talk to any enterprise use cases, the reliability isn't there. It's at 80% accuracy, oftentimes much lower than that. It needs to be at 99.99. So the first thing that most people are caring about is just how do I get that accuracy? I don't really care about the cost. Just if it needs to be a 70 model, it needs to be massive, that's fine. I just need the accuracy, especially for a lot of high value use cases. But then they start thinking about the upgrade cost. Once you now have this thing working, now you look and you go, wow, this is really expensive to deploy. How do I bring this cost down? Wow, my customers really would like it if this runs locally on the edge. I can't remotely fit this model on the edge. How do I make that worth? So I think that, as a real world, probably the inference constraints are really only necessary right now for the folks who are furthest along on the AI journey and actually have deployed AI products that are making a big impact. But I would expect in the next 2 to 3 years, as more and more people get to that point where the accuracy is high enough, we're going to start to see a really big push towards how do you make these models fit on devices, how do you make them go on the edge. Ultimately, I think most people would feel better with a fully local LLM that's private and knows what they're doing and has the memory but is not going to the that's where I expect things will be in a couple of years. I expect Apple will be pushing at it very hard once they get a model that's good enough to do so.
Thank you all so much for coming. Absolute pleasure to have you. Round of applause for our speakers.